Hi guys, here is a quick share of a journal I made, and I have used a lot of layering in this on the front cover and on a few of the pages inside the journal. I've used a picture, I believe it came off of Pinterest, a wooden frame here. This frame here is from an oak cabinet card. It didn't have one in it, it's the frame. I've used a couple of these little Tim Holt word blocks. This is the spine off of one of the books I used. I've used some corrugated cardboard and music sheet here on the front page, or the front cover actually, and some vintage shirt. This is a piece of a vintage shirt. It was the collar, and this was the other side here. And then an old vintage table runner underneath. And then underneath that, you can see a little bit of it here. I've used a piece of an old front of a book. And I've gathered some of this vintage lace table runner on the side here and wrapped it around the spine. I have used some vintage buttons. I've done some hand stitching on this book here on the cover, the spine, and this was a piece of just a piece of lace that I had laying in my stash. And then I've also have some more lace that on the spine inside. I've wrapped that a little bit of that over to the back cover, and I've used some paper from old books, song papers, some tissue paper. This here's tissue paper with the writing on it, and then some pattern paper. And then inside on the front cover, I have taken that vintage table runner and just pulled it inside here and attached it to an old math book cover. This is some French lace here that I've used, and then some lace under that. And here I have used a piece of vintage fabric, and on the spine in between each signature I've either used a piece of lace or a piece of fabric. And on this front cover, or the front page here, it is a watercolor paper, a thick watercolor paper, and then I've used book paper, vintage dictionary paper, some avocado dyed paper, some corrugated cardboard, some vintage fabric here, and this here's a vintage piece of fabric, and then a piece of lace under that, and then another one of those Tim Holt word blocks. I've used gesso and music sheet, distressed ink. I have distressed all the edges of the paper, hand torn all the paper, and some of the paper is just the blank coffee dyed papers with a little bit of something, maybe a piece of this here is tissue paper, a piece of fabric, just some little something to put on the page. Left it blank where there can be journaling in it as well. This here page is layered up with an old vintage shirt. This is the sleeve part of it that I've kind of scrunched up and sewed together with some other fabric, and there's a little tab that was on that shirt, and I've put that on top of the watercolor paper, some tissue paper, and then pattern paper, along with gesso and then some pencil scribbling on the pages. I've also used a few vintage ad papers that was from Digital Kits or from Pinterest, and here's a piece of that shirt sleeve, and then it had a little vintage snap, and I just kind of left those snaps on that. Some blank pages here, and then this here was wrapped around from this here. I used it and wrapped it around this signature of the book, and it's got that tatting on it, and you can see here's the buttonholes, and then I've used some old looking fabric here I've attached some paper underneath, tissue paper, used a little gesso. I left this one blank. And then this page here, again, is just a small piece of paper from that front. And I've used gesso, distress ink, and then some scribbles from a pencil. This is a piece of a page out of an old magazine. And this here piece of fabric was another shirt that I tore up and cut up, piece of lace, and then a cameo. And then on the back there's just some distress ink with a little bit of gesso and just a little strip of music paper. And then here I've done that again. I've also used the piece of lace here in between these two signatures. And this is another piece of that fabric shirt. I've used some texture paint. And here's a strip of the song paper. And then here I made like a little tuck spot with the layers. And this is a piece of paper from a Hobby Lobby pack. Then another piece of paper here that I've stitched on underneath this little card, a vintage piece of fabric, and then a piece of song paper. Again, like I said, there's a lot of space in this journal for journaling. A piece of paper and a piece of fabric that I've used and made a little tab. This is a piece of tissue paper, and then this here was a piece of the, well, I guess I didn't, just back this way, I guess. And it was, not real sure, we couldn't figure out what it was, but it was really a cool piece of vintage fabric that had been, was a shirt, or we don't know, maybe some type of collar. Anyways, they had this tie on it, and so I left it on there thinking that was pretty cool. And then I attached to this page here, we have another piece of that shirt, piece of sheet music, and then a piece of vellum that had a pretty flower on it. Here I've used an old envelope and made a pocket, and layered underneath that some old book page and some other tissue papers. Again, some blank pages, and this again is a digital from a kit. And then here is some of that vintage fabric, and then this was a piece of like old, like an old cloth diaper, and then some more of that other shirt, and just lots of layering throughout on these. I really enjoyed this layering. And then in between this signature here, I have another piece of that lace that I've attached. And this was from an old magazine again, and I've done some gessoing and just layered pencil, ink, some alcohol inks, gesso, and you know, just kind of made it really like a mixed media page there. And then on the back page here, I've layered again some fabrics, some paper, some applique. And then on this page over here, I've used another old envelope and attached it with a piece of paper tape here, made a fold out, and then a tag that I've made into a fold down. And then behind the piece of fabric in this vintage burlap stuff here, I've added a picture which was layered on an old envelope, and then just some coffee dyed paper and different things like that, and gesso and pencil. And then I used another Tim Holtz word block there, and then there's a little bit of layering here with some tissue paper and pattern paper, and there's another piece of that paper tape. And then I did some layering here on this page here with again, it's got the gesso, the book pages, a piece of art paper, gessoed, and distress ink, pencil, an old picture, and then a little bit of paint on there, some gesso, and a Tim Holtz word block there, and then some layering with the lace and the fabrics on this one. And then I got a couple little short pages back here, just some gesso and pattern papers. And this is gesso and pencil with some distress ink, and then that was a piece of an old receipt. And then again here with the tissue paper. And then this back page was out of an old school book that I had found in a old school that was on our property from the 1920s, and it had some names and the name of the school where the book came from, and I thought it was really cool to add it into this. And underneath that I've added just some lace and I gessoed on it and put a little bit of distress ink on it. And then here you can see the book that I used. Here was an old Reader's Digest, and then again there's the back. And thank you for watching. Bye.